Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Capital Edge Tip Line. My name is Chad Braley. I'm the CEO here at Capital Edge. And first off, I want to apologize for the slight tardiness of this week's video. I'm still recovering from my daughter's 3-day 500-team volleyball tournament. So it's been quite a weekend, but a good one. So this week, we've got three things that we're going to talk about. One is the new executive order focused on DoD, which is modernizing defense acquisitions and spurring innovation in the defense industrial base. Second, we're going to touch on some new policy guidance from the Department of Energy related to limiting the indirect costs of research institutions and institutes of higher education with DOE grants, which is kind of taking the playbook that we saw initiated at NIH initially for the same limitation on grants. Obviously, that issue is, or NIH's direction is currently in the court system. It's been enjoined. There's a stay going on that. I actually haven't seen if that's been ruled on yet or not, but DOE is going in the same direction. And third, we'll give a quick update on what's happening with the FAR 2.0 rewrite as we hear a little bit more, but still don't have a ton of information. So going with the executive order, modernizing defense acquisitions and spurring the innovation in the defense industrial base. Obviously, this EO focuses on prioritizing and maximizing the acquisition of commercial items through commercial item acquisition procedures, FAR Part 12, et cetera, and also the use of other transactions. And over the past few years, as we've had more other transactions, under the agency's other transaction authority, probably about 20 billion-ish spent on those. We're obviously expecting that to increase. Part of this executive order also directs DoD to put together a plan and report back on eliminating government processes and roles that are unnecessary and duplicative, right? So how do we streamline DoD internally from an acquisition process? And there's a few other things in here, but I think the other major one, the third one that I kind of want to touch on, is the review of the major defense acquisition programs, or MDAPs, if anybody wants another acronym. But those are essentially the 70 programs with budgets exceeding $3 billion, and evaluating those programs and evaluating and analyzing whether it makes sense to potentially cancel these programs if they are 15% behind schedule over the acquisition program baseline, 15% above cost of the acquisition program baseline, or if the contractor is unable to meet key parameters, and fourth, if these are aligned or not aligned essentially with DoD's priorities moving forward. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that plays out. Number two on our list. So the Department of Energy, as I mentioned in the intro, has come out and basically followed, National Institute of Health's path to say, hey, within DoD, right, we're going to limit on any grants for research to either research institutions, research organizations, or institutes of higher education, i.e. colleges and universities. Indirect costs are going to be limited to 15%. And in that memo, it actually says they're projecting that could save hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it was 405 maybe was the number. Don't have it in front of me. But we'll be interested to see. I would assume similar lawsuits will challenge that, just like we had at NIH. But I think the messaging is clear, right, that we've got to get indirect costs in order. And also, I think from a research organization's perspective, or even for-profit institutes doing research under grants with these agencies, right? How do we realign our cost structure to help limit the impact on the organization? And I think certain things we need to evaluate and see if those can be treated differently, if they can be charged direct, using different cost allocation and allocability methodology. So a lot to come there, right? That's a very new. I think it was the 10th last week, maybe the 11th. This memo came out, but again, similar to what I talked about in some of these earlier podcasts, I think this playbook is starting to, it started with USAID. Then we go to NIH, at least from a cost limitation perspective, right? And we're seeing different versions of this playbook kind of play itself out across the different agencies. Third, FAR 2.0 rewrite, right? So literally lining out. If it's not statutory, it's coming out. There is, from what we understand, a very deep team working on this, including GSA, which I think there were some questions around whether personnel from GSA were involved in it. One of the things from the initial communication was that non-statutory guidance would likely be put into these buying guides, right? And I think one of the challenges from an industry perspective is, okay, so we're going to have all the stuff that was in the FAR, right? It's regulation in the FAR. Now it becomes a buying guide, so it's not necessarily regulation per se; it's guidance. So, is the default going to be just to kind of follow that guidance as if it was regulation, or are we going to have contracting officers and PCOs and KOs, et cetera, being able to use business judgment as to the applicability and or deviations from quote unquote buying guides? And obviously there's been a long history of contracting officers having challenges issuing, just making judgment calls and issuing discretion because they may turn around and get their hands slapped for doing that. So that's going to be very interesting to see kind of how that plays out. Also, just again a little bit from the rumor mill, that while we may have a streamlined FAR, maybe DFARS comes next, but that a lot of the guidance, at least as it relates to DoD, is going to point to, well, if it's not addressed here, go follow it in DFARS. So unclear a little bit on how that's going to play out, but that's kind of what we know for this week, and I hope this has been helpful. If you have any direct questions, please feel free to direct message me or reach out via our website. I'll be happy to speak with you and talk to you through this. And until next week, this is Chad Braley, and thanks for your time.